Well, welcome back to Homebound List. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I seem to get sick for the entire month of November every year, and this year, no exception. Back in October, around Halloween time, I started seeing a lot of videos pop up in my YouTube suggestions for Gunne Sax dresses. This was an idea started by Gwen Shenanigans, where they took Halloween fabrics and they turned them into Gunne Sax dresses or Gunne Sax inspired dresses. And I thought that sounded really fun, but it was too close to Halloween, and I wasn't excited about making a Halloween one, but Gwen from Gwen Shenanigans mentioned that she wanted to do it again in December. So I'm gonna hop on because it sounds like fun. And I'm not a very experienced sewer. If you're looking for someone who really knows what they're doing, not your video. But if you're down with like a pretty chaotic sewer and a really beautiful result, then let's go on this journey together. As I've mentioned in some of my other videos, I have MCS, which is multiple chemical sensitivity. And that means that I have been homebound for the last 8 years. So that makes sewing a little tricky for me because I can't go into a store. So I am at the mercy of whatever they send me when they send it. So I just have to kind of guess, like, do these go together? Because sometimes the colors that you see and the colors that you get, they're not the same. But I really lucked out this time. I found a beautiful little reindeer fabric, which was just charming. And I picked a couple of different flannels to go with it. I picked like a deep red and a light blue. I was thinking about doing the sleeves in the light blue because the original pattern has a sheer white sleeve and the rest of the dress is mostly blue. I thought about doing that, but after I washed the material, the blue fabric picked up a lot of staining from the red fabric, and I was just so in love with the red that I thought, if I have enough fabric to make the sleeves in the same red, I am going to do that. So that was my stash. I had some reindeer fabric and some red fabric, and then I also ordered some wider crochet lace and some narrower crochet lace, which just worked out because they did not really give me dimensions on the website, so I had to cross my fingers, but luckily it was perfect. And then some narrow grosgrain ribbon. And I decided that I didn't want to make a dress for myself because my body is hard to fit and there's a lot of it, and I don't want to spend all that money on yardage for making a dress for my body that I'm probably not going to be very happy with because I don't have a mannequin, I don't have all the tools that I would need to make something really fitted to my body. And also, I need to get in better shape because I'm having a lot of health problems that will require me to change my body, so I don't want to commit to making a dress. But I have a 7-year-old who loves dressing up, so I found a vintage pattern from Etsy, and I'll try and link I will try to link the Etsy seller below. I found a vintage pattern for a size 8 Gunne Sax dress, and it is beautiful. So I ordered a pattern because I like making stuff up, but only if I have a basis. So I thought, I'm not really good enough to make up a Gunne Sax inspired dress, so I will follow a pattern and make a Gunne Sax dress. The pattern itself was like, the pattern in the package seemed to be okay. The seller did a good job, but once you opened up and you went through the pattern pieces, it was clear that whoever owned the pattern before I did used a lot of perfume or was in an environment where a lot of perfume was being sprayed because the paper was so full of perfume. It was very stinky. I ended up just leaving them all in a loose pile and leaving it for a few weeks. So luckily, by the time I went back to the pattern pieces and they had time to air out, they were much better, and I was able to get going without having recurring issues with the pattern pieces themselves. Okay, on to the dress itself. Most of the time that I spent working on this dress was me looking at the pattern and going, what do they want? It is a simplicity pattern, but I feel like they left a lot of instructions out, so it would be, I think, a fairly simple dress to make if you were experienced. But I have not made that many dresses. I've not made anything with sleeves in a very long time. And I'm definitely not used to working with the square collars. So it was a learning curve. I learned a lot making this dress. The first thing that I did, which I don't have a video of, is I made a mock-up because I wanted to try to change the clothes to a front clothes instead of a back clothes. I made a bunch of summer dresses for my child over the summer, and she would just end up wearing her dresses backwards so that she could do the snaps. So after the first couple of dresses, I saw that she was wearing them backwards, and well, yeah, that makes sense. You want to be able to get in and out of your clothes yourself. It's a very reasonable expectation. Pockets and independence, reasonable. But I found that I don't have the skills to convert this pattern to be a front clothes pattern and still be as cute. So I offered her that I would make it front clothes and it might not be as cute, or we could do back clothes, and she chose back clothes. So we are doing a zipper back as it is written in the instructions. So I also found, I just did a mock-up of the bodice. I didn't do a mock-up of the whole dress because if the bodice fits, then I'm sure everything else is going to be fine. And because this is for a child who is growing and will hopefully get more than 1 year of wear out of this, my goal wasn't to make it fit her. My goal was to make it fit enough so that she could hopefully grow into it some more. So the mock-up size-wise, it was okay. We're ready to go for it. Cut out the pattern, and I was very careful when cutting out the pattern to make sure that my reindeer lined up, because they were in a slightly wavy line, but they were in a line. So I wanted to make sure that the pattern pieces lined up enough, especially across the bodice and the back, that it didn't get wonky. There wasn't an obvious seam just by the placement of the reindeer. I wasn't able to completely get this lined up for the skirt because the skirt is just not cut the same way. It's not cut, you're not able to really line it up the same way. But I also decided that I didn't care about the skirt as much. My goal was to get the bodice so that everything went in a line. After initially cutting the pieces out for the front bodice part, you need to fold it in half and sew a little bit. Just sew a little bit so you can press it down and it'll be a fake button close, even though they're not real buttons. They're just tacked on. It's okay. Oh no! I needed to fold the fabric wrong sides together, but out of habit I sewed them right sides together so that instead of being able to see the bit that I sewed out and pressed down, you wouldn't be able to see that. So I had to unpick that and start over. But then it was just a matter of choosing how I wanted my lace to be and tacking that down, sewing that down. And then the cowl was trickier just because my brain needed to figure out how to make that work and how to make that look as smooth as possible, which I didn't do the best job. And the interfacing, I probably should have made it the whole fabric shape, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't add more bulk into the seams, because as it was, my machine was struggling. And I have like an old workhorse. I have a Kenmore Deluxe and Zigzag. Kenmore Deluxe Zigzag. It's a good little beast, but there's just so much going on, especially around the bodice. You're hitting the yoke, you're hitting the bodice, you're hitting all of the lace that's on there. It was a lot. But one thing that I noticed when making this dress is that the trim really helped out in covering those flaws where we had a little bit of wrinkling going on in the corners, because I don't know how to make my corners not wrinkled. It's just not a skill that I have. And where I had flannel as my contrast because I like the feel of flannel. But the problem with flannel is I know that it has a tendency to fray. So the good thing about the trim, besides being beautiful, is that I could use the trim to sort of tack down over the flannel to make sure that that didn't move around enough to fray very much. And in places where it wasn't getting tacked down by something else, then I would give it a little hand sew to try and contain it. So once we added the yoke to the bodice, then we added the waistband, which just got a very simple ribbon, and then onto the skirt, which was actually pretty simple. So this dress was made front half, back half. So we did the bodice, and then we added the skirt, and I sewed in gathers for the skirt by hand, and then that, and we added the pockets at that point, and then the back, we did the back. This has been machine sewed from here down. It's machine sewed, and then I hand basted the top part. the top part, because here is where we're adding the zipper. I was thinking about hand sewing anyway because I wanted to use this cotton thread, and I don't want to deal with it breaking all the time. Plus, I don't have a zipper foot, so I'm going to hand sew in the zipper. And after we had those two done, then we sewed those in half with just a big side seam. After we had a short dress formed, then we added the bottom bands. So the pattern itself for the long dress that I was making called for the same fabric throughout, which a little boring. I didn't want to do that, and I'm very glad that I didn't. I went with the contrast red and red around the bottom, and it also called for, well, it called for the roughly trim to go all around the top, which was a little much. I cut that out, and it called for just one row of trim on the bottom band, which didn't quite seem enough for me. So I did a narrower crochet lace and trim. I used trim on the bottom to cover the hem because I didn't have the matching thread to the fabric, which worked out really well because it's adorable. This dress looks like the kind of dress that you would see on a beautiful porcelain Christmas doll. And it's just so nostalgic and so Christmassy, and oh, my little heart just goes every time I see it. After we had the band sewn on and I tacked down all of the flannel that didn't have anything to protect it, then it was time for sleeves. Puffy and old-timey and beautiful, beautiful sleeves. Sleeves are where I made my second big mistake. It took me a while to try and figure out how to make the cuff. And then I think what I ended up doing is I made, instead of folding them up like so they're mirror images, and I had two cuffs that were in mirror images, I folded them the same so my little notch was in the same spot. So the first one that I did was perfect, and I was able to tuck all of the raw edges into the inside. Excuse me, hiccups. I was tuck that in the inside and then tack that down by hand and then cover it all with trim. It was beautiful. The second one, I used the same notch, even though my brain thought, this doesn't seem right, but this is where the notch is, so this is what we'll do. Not thinking of how little thought I put into it when I first folded up that cuff. And then I got it all done, and I realized that what is my brain? The seam allowance, all that scruffy stuff, was on the outside. So I was still able to tuck it into my cuff and tack that down and add trim and hide it and make it look pretty. But it's not as pretty as it could be. Could have been better. But if that's my mistake, my big mistake is that I had my cuffs folded the wrong way, so it's not quite as pretty as it could be, but you wouldn't really know it unless I pointed it out. I'll take it.